conversations about money with men tend to reveal deeply held beliefs about women and what they're capable of and what they really believe about women. And that can be really frightening when you wake up and you realize you see something online like, oh, Mama Wilder posted about money. Hey, babe, let's talk about money. And he says some things like, you don't need to worry about that. And you're like, oh my God, does my husband think I'm an idiot? Does he not trust me with money? Does he think that he's better? I think if you think about it, like, if you're not able to get up right now and leave your relationship for whatever reason, are you really free?
Welcome to the Whose Body Is It podcast. I'm your host, Isabella Malvin. For those who don't know me, I'm a life coach, a hypnotist, a former birth worker, and a former liberal feminist turned radical truth teller. On this podcast, you'll learn about the ideologies, industries, and technologies attempting to control our minds and bodies, such as transgender ideology, pornography, prostitution, and the many tentacles of the medical industrial complex. Together, we'll untangle patriarchal lies as you listen to jaw-dropping interviews with women from around the world. Warning, while listening to this podcast, you might find yourself triggered or perhaps notice where you've been biting your tongue on the issues that matter most to you. In the masterclasses available on my site, as well as my one-on-one coaching and hypnosis, you will learn to stop getting triggered by every freaking thing, learn to cultivate resilience, gain knowledge, and if we're working together one-on-one, stop unwanted behaviors and increase your self-confidence. You can book your first session and check out the masterclasses in the library at whosebodyisit.com. And I just want to say that it's because of your endless support that I'm able to interview amazing women, get their stories out, and produce regular content for you. So with that being said, please like, comment, and subscribe to my channel on YouTube. And if you're just listening in, leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and consider making a financial contribution via the link in my show notes. You can also support the podcast by getting your activist stickers. So my pro-woman stickers have the power to intercept transhumanist programming. So take a photo of your stickers out in the wild and tag me on Instagram at Whose Body Is It. Without further ado, let's get into this week's story. At 21, Emily Rose was sure that by getting married and having kids, she would more or less wind up living happily ever after. However, her relationship replicated some of her core wounds around growing up in a coercive control environment and where talks around money were taboo. Emily wanted to leave her marriage, but all she had to her name was her car. In this time, she went back to school and got a degree in women's studies, and with the analysis of feminists like Bell Hooks and Angela Davis, and the iron will she earned from freebirthing her second baby, she was finally ready to leave her abuser. It was only in the divorce process that she realized the full extent of the financial and physical abuse she survived. Emily began fundraising to help support other mothers fighting for freedom from abusive relationships on Instagram, and she's now turned that into the Mama Wilder nonprofit. Along the way, she fell in love again, this time with a man who's, in the truest sense, a protector and provider. This time, she may not have had the pure idealism she had in her youth, but she knew that she deserved a redemptive love story, birth, and postpartum. In this episode, Emily speaks to the importance of women initiating potentially uncomfortable conversations about prenups, property ownership, life insurance policies for women who are dating, currently in the process of selecting a partner, but also for women who are in established relationships. I hope this episode gives you a lot to think about and is a catalyst for material security and safety in your life. Emily, thank you for taking the time to record this episode with me.
I was so excited when you sent me a message. When you sent me a voice note, I was like, oh my God, everyone get out of the room. I got to listen to it. And I was like, yay, I'm so happy.
I first came across your account, I think from like freebirth stuff, like you talking about your freebirth, 5, 6 years ago, there were way fewer accounts talking about freebirth, women posting their freebirth stories. And I think that's how I found your account. I'm pretty sure that that's what it is. Oh, and I think I was also attracted to your account because you were talking about you were always referencing your gender studies degree. I remember that standing out to me as well. Like, so maybe it's a good jumping off point. Like,
Yeah.
when did you get your gender studies degree, and was it called gender studies at the time, or was it called women's studies?
So it's women and gender studies. So I was living on a homestead with my ex-husband. I was really young. I was 24, 25. And I remember I wanted to leave my ex-husband because the situation was pretty dire. And my family had drilled it into me that the only way you can leave a relationship like that is to go back to school and finish your degree. You're going to be able to have more job opportunities if you have a college education, which now I know that's not necessarily true. But I was like, I've got 2 more years to finish my degree. Let me just finish it online. And I had done some coursework online after I had become a single mom at 22. And so I went back to that same school, which was Arizona State. And they were I think they were one of the first that offered an fully online BA or BS program. And so I went back to finish. I was like, what's the quickest path to graduation? And it was just to do because I had mostly writing coursework, and I had some political science in the beginning, but it was mostly writing. And so they said, just communications. It's the quickest, you can be done fastest. And so I took an elective on women's health, the history of women's health in the United States. And I was like, this is my shit. I love this stuff. Like, I was already doing birth stuff. So it felt really important. And so I called my advisor, said, can I take more courses like this? What's the track that I would need to study to take these classes? And he said, women's studies. And a lot of the classes were gender ideology. And, it was a liberal university, so a very liberal lens. And we talked about things like breastfeeding and discriminating against mothers in the workplace. And it was a very important course of study to be doing in that time of my life, because I was in a relationship where there was a lot of discrepancy in the load, the family load, like what our burdens were. There was a lot of, I was just a glorified nanny, and I was in a coercive control relationship, and I didn't have any financial autonomy. So to be learning about feminist theory and the history of the feminist movement over the course of centuries was really important in my getting my shit together and leaving my ex-husband. And I had always known about gender discrimination through the lens of healthcare because of birth work and getting involved with things like birth monopoly and doing their birth rights, their legal rights in the birth space coursework. It really shaped my mindset, and it really empowered me to get the hell out of that situation. And so that at the time, that's probably when you found me, because I had a free birth in 2018, end of 2018, went back to school in 2019. And then I actually had filed for divorce 3 times by September 2020. And actually 4 years ago yesterday was the date that I filed for divorce that last time and left. So I went back to school that last year after I left my ex-husband with 2 little kids at home. I was working, raising my kids, finished my degree. And I was like, this is so, even if I never used this degree for anything, just having an understanding of people like Audre Lorde and Angela Davis and Bell Hooks, that really influenced the way that I look at mothering my daughters, first of all, and also how I judged potential mates, potential men, dates, people I wanted to go on dates with. So it was really, even though I didn't necessarily agree with a lot of what I was learning from this school, it really influenced the way I look at myself and other women, and internalized misogyny, and approaching conversations with pediatric health providers and knowing that they're going to treat me differently as a single mom versus when I have a husband with me. And so it really influenced me in a positive way, because I don't think you have to go through a liberal arts program and come out of it a cookie cutter, purple haired, you know what I'm saying.
Yes, I'm familiar. It's like I'm always joking with my friends. Like we see someone with pink purple hair, we're like triggered. We're like used to actually
I
be
had purple
subversive.
hair.
I
It used to
had
be
pink
like,
tips. Yeah.
right. I had pink hair twice in my life. When COVID started, I had magenta hair. I was like, why not? It was fun, but it was just, I wasn't seeing anyone, so who cared?
It was like it's a different cultural signifier these days. It means
Right.
something different than it did 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It's a completely different cultural context. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So wow, okay. So you did this gender studies program, women in gender studies. It illuminated or it sounds like it gave you the strength to finally leave your abusive ex. And this time you were raising one, two daughters?
Two. I met my husband, my first husband, when I was 23. And I was coming from a situation that was crappy. I didn't have a lot of financial autonomy. I didn't really have many other choices. And I see this a lot now because of the work that I do now, that when women don't have many other options, they find themselves in relationships that maybe aren't super great, but they feel like, well, I have to make this work because I'm in it and I don't really have another choice. And I can't go back. And they kind of just settle, for lack of a better word. And in that sense, I settled. He was the first person I dated since becoming a single mom when I was really young. I was in a really bad spot emotionally. I wasn't seeing things through a lens of clarity. I mean, my brain wasn't fully developed at 23. I just had a traumatic pregnancy. And so I was a really prime candidate for an older man to come along and say, I'll solve
Mm.
some of your problems. And it was an exploitative relationship with a lot of cultural differences rooted in a very different view of how women should be treated. He was from Italy and I wasn't. So his view of women, and I don't even think it's fair to say that this is an Italian thing. His upbringing was very specific and they were a very high control religious environment. So the way that we viewed women's roles in the family were very different. And so I had a free birth, which was, I credit the unassisted birth of my daughter with giving me the guts, the strength to get through a terrible postpartum experience and just kind of remind myself, like I would come back to center and be like, I did that on my own. She came in 2 hours. It was just him and me, and he really was just there. He didn't do anything super spectacularly supportive, but having an unassisted birth was this crazy. I mean, you've heard of these things. Like this is everyone talks about this. Like it's this empowering, like, holy shit, I just did that. I could I could scale Mount Everest with my bare hands. Like it's that crazy empowering strength you can pull from that. And so I knew it once I came out of that, like, oh, I could leave. I could figure this out. And I did. And then yeah, in a matter of 4 years, life is so different. But in some ways it's pretty much the same.
Ooh, I got chills when you were talking about your unassisted birth being like the well to draw from, like when things get hard, it's like just the thing you can always come back to be like, okay, this other thing I'm doing is hard, but like that was really hard and I did it anyway. And wow, like what power was revealed to me in that process.
I
It's
had one since
crazy.
then. I remarried and I had an unassisted birth last summer. And it's funny because within the months after having both of those unassisted births, I was in very different spaces in my life, but I was faced with extremely traumatic, kind of once in a lifetime experiences that I don't know many other people who've gone through. And I survived them in a way that, like, I remember being, without getting into it, we've gone through some crap, some stuff in the last year, my husband and I. And there was a moment when I had my baby on my chest 4 months after having him, when I think many other people who've gone through this experience, like their world is ending. It's like the most traumatic, like, oh my
Mm.
God, I didn't think that that would happen. And I just had my sleeping baby on my chest. And it was this surreal, like maybe I was disassociating, I don't know, but I was just calm. And I remember thinking in my head, I've been through worse. This,
Mm.
like, I remember thinking about my unassisted birth. I've brought two babies to this world. Nobody helped me. Nobody like comforted me. I mean, in a way, like my husband was there last time, but nobody was like the authority in that experience. It was all me. And I survived that. And I did those things that women are told you're not supposed to do that. And it was just this calm, like, oh, okay, I guess this is happening. I'm okay. We're going to be okay. The baby's okay. It was, but I really do believe that I drew from that well of strength from the unassisted birth. And I almost think like, okay, so I keep having these unassisted births. That must mean that something really big and climactic is going to happen in the next few months, because my postpartum experiences with these kids have been so, and I just draw from that knowing I've brought these babies into the world. I can survive whatever's next.
It's amazing. And I mean, if we talk about conspiracy, like the systematic strategy to rob women of this is just, I mean, it's obvious. Like, it's obviously a conspiracy to keep women small and less powerful and scared and dependent when you see such extreme growth and expansion and transformation when women are like allow themselves or decide to choose a different path or to deprogram or however we want to call it, or just have a precipitous like really fast labor where it wasn't planned at all and it just the experience just happened. Yeah.
It's almost, it's like a bad girl thing. Like I think of it like, and I've been so open about my birth. I think I shared my birth video right before that experience that I was just talking about. So it was on social media. I knew people in that room that I was in had seen that and knew about that. And so it was almost like I felt kind of like I'm a bad girl. I had these baby. I don't look like I would do those types of things. I think if you see me in person, you'd be like, there's no way. But I think I'm so open about it. And I felt like rebellious. Like I've done these things that women are not supposed to do that. We're not supposed to birth our babies ourselves. That's like something that like crazy women do that. Bad girls do that.
Right.
You're not supposed to do that.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of power in that. And like being able to say, and no, I did the thing that I'm not supposed to do. And look at me. I owned it.
Right.
And I think that's, men can't compete with that.
This is true because men don't give birth. End scene.
End scene. And then we're done. Okay, great. I joke with my friends that like, and it's maybe just coming from like my dad's military. And so all the first men that I grew up around were very, well-respected military officers, that I have a really hard time when I meet men. This is separate from the birth thing. When I have a hard time when I meet men, I'm like, you guys, you give off, like I've never met a guy. Let me put it this way. I've never met a man who I would think to myself, like the most macho, like 30-year vet of being a police officer, like the toughest guy I know, or the guy who appears the most tough. I've never thought to myself, if you were a woman, you'd have an unassisted birth. Which in my head, and this is like, maybe I'm not right, but I've met some of these people because my husband was law enforcement. And I've thought to myself sitting there talking to them, and I'm like, I have bigger balls than you.
It's hard not to feel that way once you've done the thing that you've been told is impossible and scary and dangerous and like life creation. I mean, come on, like life creation. The first birth I attended, like it was a hospital birth, and it was violent and horrible and just just so violent. And I still came out of there like, oh my God, like I just went to a different dimension. Like, how does everyone think this is normal? Like, even in the worst of circumstances, it was just to be a witness to the creation, like the emerging of life from a woman. It's absolutely nuts. So, and that's with all the fucking interference. It was to give it the kind of honor and space and autonomy that women deserve, that the process of birth deserves, is like, it cannot be contained.
it should be revered. Women should be revered. And I mean, I could write a book about the last 2 years and having a baby in what felt like war both times. I should say the last 6 years because it was about 6 years ago. It's mind-boggling how it's so close to God creating life, and it's supposed to be hidden and it's vilified and it's like, oh, we don't talk about that, or oh, like I remember my husband, he'd never had a baby before we met, and so when I had my son with him at home on our floor, he called his dad who had 4 kids, and he and his dad were talking about the birth, and my father-in-law said, women's bodies are incredible, aren't they? And I was like, I'd never heard a man say something like, I mean, like my husband says stuff like that, but I'd never heard a man of that age say that, like two
Mhm.
men talking about birth in a
Mm.
positive way. And it's just so not, it's contrary to what I grew up with, which was that birth ruins women's bodies. And oh, we don't talk about that. Or, oh, why do people have kids? It just destroys women's bodies. Like that was the messaging I heard growing up from all sides. And so to hear a conversation between not just the person that I chose to have a baby with, but his father, I was like, oh, that's new for me. I'm 30 years old. I never heard that before. Like that was really, really impactful.
From just a little that you've shared about your current marriage, and like it sounds like a quite a redemptive experience that you've had, like through all of the courts and the custody and the violence and the what sounds like torture.
Well,
Um,
it was just bad. And I was in a wounded place. And I don't ever want it to sound like, I had no agency in anything, but I just see now being on the other side that when you have a young woman who comes from a very high control family of origin, I wish more women before they had children, and I wish I did this too, but you can't go back. I wish they would, especially if they came from maybe a toxic family of origin or a high control environment, they spend time really being on their own and getting away from that before they go into having children. Because when you have children, you're automatically more vulnerable financially, socially, physically, that it's really easy to get wrapped up into unhealthy power control dynamics in your marriage and in your family of origin. And we rely on people in a way that makes us more susceptible to harm. And I was so not aware of any of that. And so I can see it now in other people. And I was so longing to have a family and to be a mom that I overlooked a lot of really bad things. And I accept responsibility for those things. But I definitely didn't want to be done having kids. I was so young. I was 27 when I filed for divorce. I was like, maybe I'm crazy, maybe I'm delusional. I want a redemptive birth. I want a redemptive postpartum. I want a redemptive experience. I don't want like a big wedding. I've never had a big wedding. I eloped both times. But I just wanted to try one more time. And I'm so glad I did. And I say to my husband, I'm like, even last night, I said, marrying you when we got married and having this baby was like the best thing I ever did. Because I was so like, women who get divorced, they're expected to take up, becoming a lush. You drink all the time and you're making not so great decisions and you're angry and you're bitter. And I didn't want that for myself. And I was like, maybe I'm crazy and maybe people aren't going to like this, but I want to try one more time.
mhm.
And I did. And it was the best thing I ever did.
I love your Instagram account so much because you do a lot of questions and answers, and I love the questions that are asked, and I love your responses. The questions are always so good, even though when they're ridiculous, they're good. I remember you mentioned that your ex was older, and I remember I remember one of your Q&As, someone had asked like, what is the problem with dating an older guy? And I remember your response being along the lines of, if you don't know now, you'll find out. Like, and it was a bit threatening. I can just hear people listening to this episode now being like, but not all, but like,
Right.
and also I think, there is a distinction between a 20-year-old with a 20-year-old woman with a 30-year-old man versus a 30-year-old woman with a 40-year-old man. Like, but there is something there. Like if you were to expand on that, on the answer to that question, like, yeah, what do you have to say about the vulnerability in terms of like the age gap between young women and older men?
Age gaps with women in their early 20s, especially, have more to do with financial vulnerability, aside from the fact that their brains are not fully developed. You are in a more financially vulnerable spot. Maybe you're not done with your education, maybe you are, but you have a lot of debt. You're just figuring out your career. You don't really know what you want to do with your life. Maybe you are still living with your family of origin. So you've never been on, I'm just speaking in general terms. Most young early 20s women have not been on their own enough to know how to live on their own and take care of themselves and pay bills and car insurance and registering a car and opening up a savings account and applying for a mortgage, things like that. Things that really do impact marriage, because I look at marriage as not just like a sacred bond between two people, but it's a legal contract. It is a financial contract. It is a business decision. And when you're young, at least for me, I looked at it through a romantic rose-colored glasses lens. I wanted a family and I fell in love. I allowed myself to fall in love with people who were not ever going to give me the lifestyle that I wanted for my children. I thought, well, if I love them and if he loves me, that's enough. And that's not enough. It's not enough. And it's, I think a lot of times, like you just said, there is a big difference between a 30 and a 40-year-old versus a 20 and a 30-year-old. And the difference is that a 30-year-old woman and a 40-year-old man, they've both probably been on their own and had some relationships in the past, and they know what it's like to take care of themselves financially and to travel alone maybe, and to open up a credit card and have a car note and pay rent or a mortgage. And a 20-year-old hasn't done those things, most likely. And it's really easy for a young woman to become ensnared in a coercive control relationship with an older man when she doesn't have autonomy and the ability to exit that relationship with ease, which is why I get so, I don't want to say panic, because I don't get anxiety on behalf of other people, because I can't stand when people do that with me, but I'm like, ooh, that doesn't look so great. It's like a train wreck when you have someone who comes from a financially unstable environment and they rush into a relationship with someone who maybe wants to solve all their problems, and it's a very fast moving relationship, and they're getting married because they love each other and it's very romantic. And I get that. I'm so sympathetic to that, but it has all the makings of the perfect storm of coercive control. And the younger you are, the more financially unstable you are. That's just a fact. The older you are, the less age gaps really play a big role.
Mm-hmm.
When you're younger, it's a lot. It's not just 10 years, it's more like 20 years,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It makes a lot of sense. It really does. Especially going from, like you said, your family of origin straight to another a place where you don't have to grow up in that sense. Like you don't actually have to learn how to do all the things you described, like pay for car insurance and take out a mortgage and learn how to pay your bills on time if you have someone like doing it all for you, like maybe mom and dad did. You also talk a lot about, like wow, we could get I want to get into so like the stay-at-home mom, the culture, the anti-feminist stuff that's really has a lot of momentum. But another thing that you talk about regularly on your platform is women who are, in healthy relationships, right? Who are at home with their babies, who are free birthing and attachment parenting, or maybe you had a hospital birth and you're still at home with your babies, whatever. If you are not gainfully employed by a company that would offer you 401k and all the things, it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like what you're advising women to have and to set up for themselves is for their working husbands to set up accounts for them and to be continuously putting money into that account, which honestly, I mean, I know it's done, but like when you first said it, I was like, whoa, I was like, that makes a lot of sense. But there was also a part of me that was like, is that fair? Like, there's the part of me that was like, does it make sense? And then I like took it like another 30 seconds and I was like, of course that makes sense. Like, this is like the fuckery of divorce that leaves women with nothing, where dad gets to keep the house and mom has to move out. Like, God, I've heard so many horror stories of, even the homes that women gave birth in. Their placenta's buried in the backyard, and they get divorced, and there's nothing set up to protect them. Can you speak to that piece of advice to women who are in like healthy, loving relationships, who trust their husbands, but who are not earning money?
I think it's first of all, it's a really controversial subject because I think when a lot of people have these discussions or open the floor for these discussions with their partners, they find out through these discussions that their partners really have no respect for them. And people can feel really defensive about this. And,
Mm.
what I say is that now that I've seen through my own family and coming from a family that has money and watching my grandmother not have a clue of what her husband was doing with money for however many years. It worked out for her. She lucked out in that when he died, he left her a lot of money, but most women are not that lucky. They get left with debt, or they find out that things are not really super great and he hid things from them, and marriage is not a retirement plan because human behavior is not predictable in the sense that I don't know if next week my husband could get, he could be riding his bike and get hit by a car, have a closed head injury. So there's no visible trauma, but his personality changes because his brain's been rocked. And all of a sudden he's making decisions that don't make sense. He's drained our money. He's modified our trust. He's done things that I would have never guessed a million years he would do in his right mind, but something is wrong that I can't see. Or a tragedy happens and something happens to him. Not all men will cheat on their wives or leave them for the nanny or the secretary, but 100% of men die. And sometimes for a lot of those women, they die they die young, or they die in completely tragic freak accidents. And then what? I've seen too many women whose partners have died, and those women had to wait to go through probate. It took months, years to get money. And every state's different, every bank is different. But the way I like to look at it is, if you don't own a vehicle in your name is not on your home, your name is not on your car or your phone plan. If everything is in someone else's name, what do you own? You personally, separate from what you think you own, because I live in a community property state. What do you own? What is yours that no one can take from you? My car is mine. I had my car before. In fact, when I left my ex-husband, my vehicle was the one thing in my name that I had. I didn't have a phone in my name. I didn't have the house. I wasn't even on the lease to the lease agreement for our home. I had my car. He was never on my car. And so that was the only thing I could take with me. And a lot of women, especially women, where there's an age gap, they fall in love with men who want to give them the world. And I'm a romantic at heart. I get it. And they wake up one day and they're like, oh, I was a frog put in a pot of water and the water was turned up. The heat was turned up and now the water is boiling and I need to get out. And they realize, oh my God, what do I do? I have nothing. I have nothing. And I can't tell you how many times I'll read an application and it'll say, I caught my husband cheating. I confronted him. I told him I was done. So he called 911, told them I was having a psychotic break, and I threatened him. I got arrested. He got a restraining order. I got kicked out of my house. My newborn baby is home because now the husband told the police I'm postpartum and I have postpartum psychosis, and I have no money. I have no car. He took everything, and I can't see my kids. And it happens all the time. And it's so predictable. We talk about the cascade of interventions with birth. It's the same thing in these relationships. Something happens, like there's a series of events over the course of years. Like, oh, that's weird. He gave money to his family, but his sister, but he won't give money to me. It's like these little things, and all of a sudden the heat's up, and you're like, oh shit, the water's boiling. I got to jump out. So the woman will confront her husband and say, this isn't fair. You're not treating me like a human. I want to leave you. And he's like, well, I'm going to pull out the rug from underneath you. And now everything's mine. Because what are you going to do? It's methodical. It's strategic. it's been set up that way. So these women don't own anything. And I had my own bank account because my ex-husband was foreign, so we never had a bank account together. But having my own bank account and having my own vehicle were the only things that got me out of that situation, that if I didn't have them, I would have been on that farm a lot longer than I was, if not buried in the ground. So, and I don't want to look at it like, look at all these relationships through a very pessimistic lens, but even just having your name on your car, if you have two cars, the car that you drive the most, the minivan, why is it in his name? Why is it not in your name? Why is your phone? Why are you not on the, like, why not have your own phone plan? And it's controversial in the sense that people get really triggered when they hear this, because they're like, well, marriage should be, you're combining lives and you're one person. It's like, that's great. But in this world, is it realistic? I don't think it is. I think every woman should have at least one thing that's hers on top of her own bank account, one something. And the best case scenario would be great if not only could her husband be putting money into a Roth IRA every year, maxing that out, or a high yield savings account that's specifically hers, but in a best case scenario, like maybe they purchase an investment property and they travel to it once a year and they vacation, but it's in her name. So that's, if something ever happens, there's not only is there a safety net for the family, like let's say one of the children is diagnosed with cancer and they need money, but also that's an asset that's in her name that's accruing equity. And so a marriage is not a retirement plan. And I think if these men really love you, they will want you to be financially secure in the event of their untimely deaths.
What stands out to me of what you said, like the most potent case about this is that you cannot predict human behavior and sudden death happens. Yeah.
All men die. Not all men cheat on their wives with the secretary, but all men will die. And so what's the plan for if he gets hit by a bus tomorrow? Do you know where the power of attorney is kept? Do you know what's in the trust, the family trust? Do you know what's in the will? Do you have access to all the bank accounts? Do you know how to get into everything? I remember sitting in front of my ex-husband and thinking to myself, I can put up with you threatening to kill me all the time and being violent, but I can't put up with the fact that if you die tomorrow, I don't even know how much money you make. I don't know about the money. I didn't have money to feed my kids that my mother wasn't sending me or that I wasn't getting from selling my stuff. So I was like, I can tolerate a lot of crap. I can't tolerate not having any money. If I'm expected to be home with these kids and not allowed to work, I need to be able to buy food for my kids. And so that's unlivable for me. And I see it in so many relationships. And I'm like, oh my God, like this doesn't have to be this way.
Yeah. It's really naivete. Like even the resistance to the prenup. I have really wonderful, smart friends who are engaged who don't want to get a prenup.
Why? Why not?
I hear the most common excuses I hear of, well, neither of us have anything.
But you will, right?
Yes,
Don't you want
you
to
could
have
win the
things?
lottery. You could inherit something from your great aunt Sally. Like you have no idea what's in store for you. Like let's hope you
Right.
just keep making more and more money every year. It's a kind of like denialism. I think yeah, like you said, you can't predict human behavior, and it's uncomfortable to sit with the idea that you or your partner could radically transform and want something else, die
By no fault of your own. It
by
could be
yeah.
nature.
Yes, it does. Yes, like depersonalizing it, and like you said, not going to the okay affair with the secretary, scenario. Yeah, there is a kind of a denialism, even though intellectually, I mean, you could show people stats. These are the divorce rates, right? You know that this is
Right.
what can happen.
The government has its own prenup for you. That's the thing about a prenup. You probably will have life insurance if you get married, right? Because you want your partner to be taken care of if something happens to you, which is the same for a stay-at-home mom. I have a life insurance policy for myself, and I'm not working out of the home, but I need to think about, well, what will my husband need if something happens to me tomorrow? My husband's
Yeah.
going to need care. He's going to need a nanny. He's going to need to go to court. Like, So I wanted to cover all those things and have a life insurance policy that compensates my husband for my value to the family and all the can of worms that would open if something happened to me. No matter what happens, if you were to separate in the United States, the government has its own prenup for you. A prenup is just like the government has its own plan for how it's going to separate your assets and decide who gets what and whatever. A prenup is just saying, no, government, we made our own choices. It's a preemptive strike. Like the government's not going to be able to divide your assets. Your prenup has dictated. And I mean, like if you expect to be poor for the rest of your life, like you are when you get married young, sure, like go for it. But at the same time, that's not my goal. Like I didn't want to not have anything the rest of my life. Hopefully you accrue assets, you have accounts, and you acquire some wealth by the time you're 70 or 60, and you don't know what's going to happen. Like it's short-sighted, and I get it's not romantic, but guess what? Marriage is not always romantic and sunshine and butterflies. You have to have so many uncomfortable conversations and talk about boundaries and talk about things that are not sexy. And a prenup is not sexy. But that's marriage. Marriage is not sexy. Like it is a business decision with someone. You're talking about, I've had two unassisted births with two different people. Having children is the most transformative, bonding, unifying experience that two people can go through. And it's not really sexy because there's blood and guts, and you have to talk about organs. And it's like, marriage is not all like romance, and it's uncomfortable conversations about money and subjects that you really don't want to talk about. And that I really didn't even know that the first time I got married. And so, which is crazy because I didn't come from a super religious environment where I think that might be more common. And even I was like, oh, I remember being, after I got married, I remember my aunt and uncle calling me, and they're saying, do you know what your husband makes like every year? And I go, no. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, he told me I don't need to worry about it. And they're like, that's not normal. Like, you're not, what? Like, you should know. So it really, I know if I didn't have that figured out, there are other women who don't have that figured out.
Mm-hmm. Okay, as you're sharing, I'm like thinking about all the polarity stuff that I read and consume and like align with some and don't align with others. And I'm hearing like I can hear the women in my network and like the conversations I've been having with women, like in a really vulnerable, like it's very vulnerable to be like, I'm a radical feminist, but I'm like also like really interested in polarity. It's like it can at the surface value it can seem contradictory. And so but what I'm hearing, like, it's like actually what you're describing is like the ultimate polarity. Like your expectation, what I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing is in that you're promoting, right? Or what you're trying to inspire women to acquire is actual security and safety, right? Like until we as women in the context of a heterosexual relationship, you're describing actual security and safety, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
just like the baseline expectation that you have in a relationship, given all that you've been through, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're asking women to like look at the facts and like design what is material security.
We are in a world now where, thanks to the feminist movements, plural, over time, women can have things like their own line of credit, and they can own property, and they can have assets. It shouldn't be controversial. Why are we not taking advantage of those? But I think the roadblock people run into is when they have these conversations with their husbands. Conversations about money with men tend to reveal deeply held beliefs about women and what they're capable of and what they really believe about women. And that can be really frightening when you wake up and you realize, you see something online like, oh, Mama Wilder posted about money. Hey, babe, let's talk about money. And he says some things like, you don't need to worry about that. And you're like, oh my God, does my husband think I'm an idiot? Does he not trust me with money? Does he think that he's better? And I think if you think about it, like, if you're not able to get up right now and leave your relationship for whatever reason, are you really free? Do you really have autonomy in that relationship? If you cannot get up right now and take your stuff, like, what do you own? If you can't take a car out of the driveway and go fly to your parents, are you really in that relationship because you want to be or because you are stuck there? And I think that, it's a crappy thing to think about. But when I looked at it like that, I remember someone asked me, they said, if you win the lottery tomorrow, would you stay or would you leave? This was when I was married to my ex-husband. And I remember thinking, money is the only thing keeping me here. I don't have money. That's it. If I had money, I would leave. I read a story recently that said that divorce is so frequent when women win the lottery because they can finally leave their husbands.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not because they don't want to be wives, it's because they finally have the freedom to leave. And I think about that a lot, like these women who are unhappy, what is keeping you in that situation? And I think for a lot of them, it's the lack of money because they're with their babies where they should be, but they don't actually have any access to the money coming in.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And I think when we talk about, masculinity and femininity, I don't like to use those terms in what I talk about because I don't know. I have mixed feelings about that stuff. But when we talk about masculinity, like the way that I'm raising my children is to know that men are supposed to be protectors and providers in society. Like men should be standing up for women. Men should be putting themselves between women and children and predators. But the facts are most predators are men. So it's conflicting. And I want to believe that most men are good. I do think that most men are nowadays, I think maybe socialized or conditioned to not stand in that protector provider power where they should be. I tend to raise my son that way. And most are just kind of like cowering behind whatever. But that's what we should be expecting of men because isn't that kind of the point of being in that role? Like if a man wants to be a protector provider and reap the benefits of that, of being a husband and father, then why is he not securing his wife and children in the event of his untimely death or his diagnosis or his fall off the roof? I mean, I'm watching these men build this roof across the parking lot and I can see them up high and I'm like, if one of them falls off, what's going to happen to their families?
Yeah. And I know you get a lot of flack online because you are the catalyst for these conversations happening in homes all over the world. So that, yeah, as you were talking about the money thing kind of being the potential for the money conversation to illuminate the level of respect a man has for his wife. The same with birth. Like, it's the making those autonomous choices in pregnancy and birth and the resistance to it and the attempt at control around those decisions it's super revealing. And yeah, I can understand, as you said, why women want to avoid these harsh truths, because when you have that information, then you have to do something with it. And it's like a microscope on that.
It is. And it's not usually something that people want to bring up right away. And I get that. And I just, I think the true now knowing what I know, because I've been through some shit, but I feel like the best relationships from my observations and my experience, when two people show up as their true authentic selves, all of the masks off, and they're willing to talk about the uncomfortable conversations and they're willing to talk about the nitty gritty and be truly honest about everything, I think it's a better foundation. But when two people show up and someone's not being totally honest, someone's hiding something, there's coercion in that. Because if I'm showing up and I don't tell you this thing in my closet, this skeleton that's going to come out and impact our relationship, I am coercing you into a relationship with me. Because if you had known all the facts, if you'd known someone had a drinking problem 5 years ago and went to rehab and was in AA, and they don't tell you, or they have a criminal charge, or there is a protection order in someone's past, and they're not allowed to contact a woman, why did like that? Or they have an illness or a disease that they're not being completely truthful about. It is coercion. And I think that when you have these conversations sooner rather than later, you weed out, and this is obviously geared toward women who are not married and who are dating, maybe they're divorced, but the sooner you have uncomfortable conversations, the nitty gritty, the better you are. You can use a sieve, and whoever's filtered out of that is a contender. And the people who are like, oh, I don't want to talk about that, or that's none of your business, like, then you're not ready to show up for a fully authentic relationship with me. If you're not willing to talk about the fact that you have $300,000 in debt, that's going to impact our life. And so it's just like hiding, like someone who shows up to a relationship and forgets to tell someone that he has a child out in the world. That is deceptive, and that is coercion. And I think a lot of people, myself included, really did wake up one day and found themselves in a relationship with someone that had lied and had coerced them into a relationship, but they're stuck because they're pregnant and they don't have any money. And he totally said, I know you just want to be home with your babies. Why don't you do that? And you're like, okay. Like, it's all very predatorial, and it breaks my heart because it is so normalized and glossed over as it's romanticized, and it's not. I think true romance is showing up authentically to a relationship and saying, this is me. I'm bare, I'm exposed. Love me. I love you. Let's do this. And anything less than that is a recipe for disaster.
You've mentioned a number of times like women that have filled out applications for your nonprofit and women who are in dire circumstances, discovering that their husbands cheated on them, they have nothing in their name. Can you talk a little bit about your experience fundraising on social media and how it is now a nonprofit?
So I had about 10,000 followers when I left my ex-husband, and I had taken a break from social media, and because I was going through a divorce, I was like, I just don't want to be on the computer, on the phone all the time. And I came back and I was very honest. I said, I'm going through a divorce and this is some stuff. Like, I was learning in real time, and I was very honest with my following of what was going on, and not, I don't think in a vulgar way. There was no gag order. So I said things through my lens that were truthful and also were corroborated by court filings and documents. Like, it's this fact that 3 different judges in Colorado have found that I have survived domestic violence. So I can say that. Like, I can say that I've survived domestic violence. That's something the court agrees with me on. And so I was open about it, and I started fundraising for women, just doing fundraisers. And when I met my husband, he was a prosecutor at the time, and he goes, how have you been able to do all this? I said, well, social media is paying for my divorce. And he said, what do you mean? I said, I'm fundraising. And he's like, that's a tax nightmare. He's like, people are just sending you money. He's like, what if you get audited and then it looks like gifts? You have to explain where the money went. And I'm like, but it went to other women. He's like, hold the bus. Anyway, so my husband lost his job, and he suddenly had all this time in the world to put into our projects. And the first project he did was, he was like, I'm going to apply for 501c3 status for your organization. Let's sit down. Let's talk about it. Who do you want to invite to be on your board? Let's actually talk about it. And we talked about it with some other attorneys. He applied and we got 501c3 status. And now we have a board of 9 women all over the country. And it's pretty split between California and Colorado, and then Montana. But it's such an interesting, diverse group of women. And what we're doing now is, and it's all volunteer based. Nobody's paid. We don't have that kind of revenue yet, although that would be nice. We don't take any state funding, no federal grants or anything like that. But what it is women will write in and they explain what's going on. And we just offer cash grants to women who are most often finding themselves at the intersection of family and criminal court. So a lot of, in the United States, district attorney offices, like if your abuser's been criminally charged, you will be working with the DA. And the DA's office has what's called the Crime Victims Compensation Fund, which you can apply for money, essentially, like for therapy, or let's say he busted down your door. You can pay for someone to come fix your locks or your door or a security system or, whatever it is. But a lot of times those funds, they're run by the government, so they're ineffective and they don't cover everything you need. And they're not trained on domestic violence and the nuances of domestic violence. And I know this because I married someone who was a deputy DA, and they're very ill-equipped to handle victims' issues. And so a lot of these women are being failed by their local law enforcement communities. And that's where we come in. And despite my proximity to law enforcement and having gone through a trial and testifying against my abuser and then marrying a prosecutor, I still had so much left to learn. And we got married, and it was like a whole other world was opened to the insides of law enforcement. And I suddenly found myself, I was like, oh, I'm a prosecutor's wife. What does that mean? Because that's so contrary to everything I believe in. Like, I've seen firsthand what law enforcement, when they fail people. And so to all of a sudden be on the inside, I was like, even though he only lasted 6 more months before he was fired, it was very illuminating for me. And I was haunted by what I saw and how I saw these people talk about victims and women, mothers just trying to protect their kids. So this organization was born, and it's still a grassroots organization. We are funded completely by social media. So all of the bonuses and the ad revenue and everything from the subscriptions from my personal Instagram go directly to the bank account for this nonprofit. And so we run on donations and the monthly subscription fees. It's all run through my social media. So anytime I have a reel go viral, that's more money into the program. And so women will write in and explain their situations, and we will see how we can best assist them. And we've had to kind of modify what we are willing to fund. We have a lot of people asking for family law attorneys, and that's something that we had to stop doing because being married to a lawyer, I know that family law attorneys will just try to scam single moms. And we're very honest with them, and we'll say it doesn't cost $7,000 to get a restraining order. It's actually free. Like, you can go down to the courthouse and get one yourself. But most attorneys are not willing to tell women this. And so it's a lot of conversations with applicants. It's not just a one-time, here's $1,000, boom, go spend it however you want. It's actually what you're looking for is best supported by this program, or let's help you find this. It's a lot of back and forth. And it's free. And we have a very small team of applicants reviewing applications. And we'll try to connect people with resources. Like, I think you might benefit from this person or this, have you contacted these people in your town? So it's very hands-on, very interactive, and over 115 women have applied since we started in early 2023. So and we actually didn't really open our doors until October of last year. So it's almost a year, and over 115 women have applied. All of the money that comes in goes right back out. Like, we don't have a brick and mortar building. We just have a software that is a very inexpensive software. So all of the money coming in goes right back out. And it's been really rewarding to see. In fact, I just got an email while I was sitting here. My phone just illuminated. A woman just let me know that her friend was an applicant, and she met with one of our resources that we collaborate with, and she left her abuser. So it's nice to see. Like, I tried to do something. I thought about what did I need when I was leaving, and it was just like a lighthouse, a beacon of hope, like someone to say, yeah, we'll help you get through this.
It's amazing. That's amazing. What a success it's been so quickly. So awesome that you brought someone into your life to help you just like formalize what you were already doing to make it sustainable.
Yeah. And what's crazy now is that my husband, you don't have to cut this part out. Shortly after we got married, I learned that my abuser's DV case was lodged, and I loudly complained about it. And I didn't really know that you're not supposed to complain about attorneys if you are an attorney or married to one. I didn't know the politics in that community. And so I loudly complained. And shortly thereafter, he was fired from his job. And so, which I saw coming. I connected him with an employment law attorney 2 months before he was fired. So I knew that was going to happen. I didn't know that they would take it as far as they did, but it was pretty serendipitous because all of a sudden he had time to work on the nonprofit. He was home with me during my pregnancy. He worked from home. He created a firm actually himself and started defending clients. And he's a public defender at heart, in that he really believes in the good of people, but also he was raised by a single mom. So that totally shaped the way he views women and women with money. So he's seen women, he was raised by women, a family of women. So he's only known women who have their own money and their own careers. His mother had a PhD. So comes from a totally different background than my first husband. And he was home with me during my pregnancy and home for the birth. And it was just such a serendipitous, like totally out of left field, what happened to us and what we went through. But it was such a blessing in the end, because my husband now is home all the time. I don't lose him to a 7 to 7 job every day. And it was like, it was still the worst thing I've ever gone through, but it was also such a blessing because it created so much good in the sense that we all of a sudden had the time to create this 501(c)(3. And if he hadn't lost his job when he did, we wouldn't have been able to do that because I was so sick when I was pregnant. And it was just, so it was really, it was, it was fate. Like, oh, okay, that all happened. Like I try to think of it that way. Like, okay, that all worked out for the better of our family.
Amazing. You've mentioned a number of times that when you were in your abusive relationships, you were young, your brain wasn't fully developed, but you're also someone who had you did have your children young. You mentioned you're 30, you have 3 kids. Yeah, how do you hold it? Like how, because I've heard you talk about how like how proud you are to be a mother and that you faced a lot of denigrating remarks about having been a young mom and that being like having your kids was the best thing you ever did. At one time, wow, it really stood out to me. One time you wrote like you have your own fan club. Like no matter what, they're so happy to see you every day, and it's like the joy of your life. But at the same time, you're very vocal about the vulnerabilities, the economic vulnerability that you faced as becoming a mom when you mentioned 22.
Yeah, I was 22. Wow. Yeah. I don't regret my children. I had them all in very different circumstances. Of course, I don't regret them. I love them. I wish that I had been humble enough to acknowledge when I was 21 that I don't have it all figured out.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe fixating on getting married and having children was not the solution to my problems. I wish I had been a little bit more humble with myself and honest with myself, I should say, and acknowledge that what I actually wanted was to enjoy motherhood. I wanted to be home with children and not have to worry about all the things I worried about because I ultimately did stay home with all my babies. I breastfed them, I co-slept with them, I made it work, I figured it out, but it was within confines that were so unpleasant. And I wish I had really sat and thought, okay, I want to be a mom. Well, how is that going to look like? What I really want when I say that is I want to be able to take my kids to the park and not have to go back to work for a couple of years until I feel like it. I want a husband who really values my time and my role in this family and lets me have access to money. I want a provider, a true provider, but who also views me as a human, who doesn't resent me, who doesn't look at me like I'm just a burden, who doesn't think I'm an idiot, who's willing to help me maybe go to grad school if I want to go to grad school, or if I want to teach homeopathy, like help me do that, invest into me. What I wanted and what I thought I wanted, I conflated motherhood across the board, period, with like the be all, the end all. But what I really wanted was financial security and autonomy in motherhood and to really enjoy it. And I didn't see that part of it. I only saw the immediate having a baby with someone I love and things will be great. All we need is love. And I came from a family where we weren't allowed to talk about money. And I came from a very controlling family that used coercive control was a parenting method of my family. So I couldn't see that I was going right back into something that was familiar. I didn't have a period of time between those two experiences to really be like, oh, okay. And if I could do it over again, I wish I would have taken time to travel and just like get away from that to really be on my own before jumping into a marriage. And that might have taken only a year. It might have taken 5 years. Like I could have, if I had the wherewithal I could have broken away from my family of origin and dealt with my shit, maybe like in Thailand or something, and then come back more with a grasp of what's going on and still had my kids young. It doesn't have to take 10 years.
Right.
But I just think like age doesn't really matter. It's, are you able to separate how fucked up you are and where that came from where you're going and what you want and how are you going to get there? Because I have stayed home with my kids. I have breastfed, I've co-slept. I've not put them into daycare. And the reason for that was a lot of luck and privilege and working hard and having people along the way who helped me. And But at the same time, I shouldn't have had to struggle so hard. And my kids shouldn't have had to struggle. And they shouldn't have had to know what it's like to not go to preschool because mom's car died and it won't start. And I guess we're not going to work or school today. Like, that's not something I wanted for my kids, but I never thought about that. Mm-hmm. And I think the money thing is so important because people think, well, I'll just get married and I'll live happily ever after. And that's not going to happen. You have to be able to talk about money.
Well, I want to thank you so much for all of the wisdom that you've imparted to my audience in this episode. There's so much here to think about, jumping off points for conversations, especially as you mentioned for women still in the dating phase who are still, in the process of choosing partners. What an advantage to have all this information. So thank you so much for this, and I'll link the Mama Wilder nonprofit in the show notes. Is there anything we didn't get to that you want to impart on listeners?
I do want to say, like, I totally respect and understand the women who have these epiphanies about maybe the reality of their relationships, and they're like, but my babies are young. Like, what am I supposed to, should I leave? What should I do? Leaving is the most dangerous time in a woman's life, and it's not something that should just be done flippantly. And if it comes to that, where you realize this isn't livable, this isn't something I want for the rest of my life, to save your life and to be really, really smart, you have to take time to make a strategy and think about it. And sometimes you don't have time. And if shit hits the fan, you gotta go. But I think it's really worth strategizing, because a lot of times people want to leave terrible situations and they're like, oh shit, it's hard out there. I'm just going to go back. I'll just walk on eggshells. I know what buttons not to push. And then they're stuck again. And there was a woman, a friend of an influencer. I don't really know the details, but I read the article. Her husband, she left him after 15 years or something, and she went back and he killed them both. And their teenagers are without parents. And it's, like I said initially, if the only thing keeping you in a relationship is the fact that you financially can't leave, you're not free. It's not love. Love is not supposed to be controlling. Like, you should have freedom, and your partner, like, I do believe that men are here for a reason, of course, but the true providers and protectors, they will love you and they will want to be there because you are free to be there. It's not a controlling relationship. That's what love is. It's the absence of control.
Thank you so much, Emily.
Thank
I can't wait.
Having me.
You're so welcome. It was such a pleasure. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend or family member who needs to hear this content. And if you do share it on social media, don't forget to follow and tag me at Whose Body Is It? So until next time.